Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining today's Lunch and Learn. We've got a very exciting one. We're going to be going through a little look at the web forms customization that we've got coming up in the next release. So today we've got Pete Donaldson, who I think everybody in the world of Sage 200 knows because he's our Sage 200 trainer. You'll probably all been trained by him in some capacity. And we've also got Ben Smith, who's the team leader of the developer services team. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to join. We'll probably give them about 3 minutes past, and we'll get cracking then. But if, like as always, if you've got any questions, you've got the questions box down the bottom. We're going to hold questions until the end, if that's all right, because I'd imagine quite a lot of people will have quite a lot of questions. So any questions, pop them in the chat at the bottom. At the end of the session, we're going to record this and put it on Partner Hub as well, so you can go back and watch it whenever you want to share it with colleagues. And we've also got a very short survey at the end of the session too, so you'll get an email about it, and please complete it because the more feedback we get on these things, the greater changes we can make, and we can mold the future sessions to what you guys want. So I think the next Lunch and Learn session, the one for September, will be the product release. So this is sort of a starter before the main course, I suppose you could call it. But we'll give everyone another, see what time we're on, give everyone another minute, and then we'll get cracking. So if anyone does have any questions or anything, feel free to pop them in the chat. But we'll try and answer them all at the end if we can do.
So the weird bit where we all stare at the webcams waiting for the start.
Just watching the clock, mate, ready to go. For 5 seconds, Pete. So we'll hold ourselves. 3, 2, 1. Right, brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Pete. But yeah, we're going to start off with Pete. So Pete, like I said before, he's our Sage 200 trainer. Pete and Ben are the guys you're all here to see today. So I'll pass over to Pete. Pete will then pass over to Ben, and Ben will go through some other bits of functionality. But Pete's going to show you how to set it up, and he'll go over his bits and pieces now. So Pete, I'll just pass to you, and I'll stick myself on mute and turn my camera off so there's no shirt distractions or anything. And then yes, all good there, Pete?
I am. Now I'm just going to double check to make sure everyone can see my screen. Give me a second there. Can you confirm that you can see my 200 web forms slide?
I can, yes. Great. Good start, mate. Better than last time.
Excellent start, yes. So welcome everybody. Like Michael says, my name is Peter and I work on the 200 training team. And my part today is it's quite small, really. Just I guess think of me as a compare to the main show that is Ben when he comes in to do his bit later on, the customization. But for those of you who aren't aware, so maybe a little bit of history, we've put a lot of work into making Sage 200 as accessible as possible, and the web forms they're a massive part of this. We're looking to depart from desktop dependency, if you like, and enable users to manage their finances anywhere with an internet connection. We've now got over 60 screens that can be accessible via a web browser. So you can, raise a quotation or a sales order when you're out visiting a customer. If money's too tight to mention, you need to keep an eye on the money going out. Then you can set up purchase authorization, then authorize purchase transactions when you're at the office. Or even people in the warehouse can perform a stock take using a tablet and just enter the values as they go and count up. So there's a lot of work being done in that area of the program. So I'm going to start today by just looking at we're going to look at both professional and standard because there is a little bit of difference in how you set up in both variants. But in terms of how you use it, it's pretty much the same, But I'll get started with professional. So if I just load up you should be able to see my VM there at the moment. And if I just quickly minimize that, and we'll open up System Administrator. I'll get that loaded in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go and have a look and see what licenses we have, what we actually that we can dole out to users, so that they can be web users. I'm just going to let my system load in for a second. And this is an apology from me, by the way, because this actually was switched on, and then I had to turn it off for some reason. I forgot to put it back on before the webinar. But there we go, we're back in. So the first thing I do is if I go into license, then we can see straight away the number of web users that we have on this account and the number of web users that we have that are currently assigned to users. If I go into the user section there, we can see very easily in the web user column which user is the web user in my scenario. Sorry. So I just right click on the user itself and go to properties. We have this tick box here, and this is what we're going to be. Right, it's basically the is this user a web user tick box. We tick it. We tick it, and they are. If we don't tick it, then they're not. It's as easy as that, you know. So if I OK that, and then straight away, once I've done that, this user can now access those web forms internally. So any user on your local network with that tick box ticked can see the screens if I was to go back into the program. Oh, there, yep, the right one, sorry. And then we can click Show Web Portal in Browser. It will bring it up. Now, even though I have just done it from within the program, it's still going to ask me which company that I want to access when I first log into the web browser. And this will always revert back to what you have set up in System Admin for your users. So any company that you give access to in System Administrator, depending on what feature access they have in the program, will dictate the screens that you can see here. So if I just quickly go down and I'll pick, which company was I in again? I was in Commercials 2023, wasn't it? So if I go back into there, pick Commercials 2023, and open up that, and we can see what the web forms look like. Now, if I was to go into, for example, I talked about raising a sales order when you're at senior customer. So if I go into the sales order processing section, into quotations, create a new quotation, and there we have the new quotation field, which you can then fill out, save to the system, and then you can save as a PDF if you like on your tablet or whatnot, and then email that directly to the customer when you're in the same building as them. So it's a big time saver, that one when that one was brought in. Now, if you want to set up your users to be able to access the network, to access the web forms outside of your local network, then there are some extra steps that you need to go through to do this. And essentially, you need to connect Sage 200 to your Microsoft 365 account. Now, I can't do that, unfortunately, on this demonstration because I don't have a tenant that I can use. However, we do have the help files in the system that will guide you through it, and it really is a step-by-step process. You know, how to connect Sage 200 and Microsoft 365, activating your Microsoft 365 account, and so on until you've created your users and they can now go and access the web form. Now, in terms of how they'll access it once you set them up, depends on the system that they're using. You know, if they have a tablet or a phone, or maybe it's an Apple Mac, you know, it's going to be through a URL. And the URLs will, let's bring them up on screen here for a second. Your professional URL is going to look something like this if it's the internal one. So you've got your server information there, the port, and then the extension at that point. And if it's an external connection, then it's going to look something like this. Now, this information is in the help files as well, so don't worry about screenshotting this or trying to quickly scribble it down. The information is all there, but there is going to be a difference when you come to connection, depending on if you're connecting from your internal network or externally to your local network. That's the standard one, which I was going to show you later, but I may as well show you now. But that's what the standard URL will look like. So I'll go back into the program for a second, and we will get rid of that for now. And like I say, standard is a little bit different. So the first thing we need to do in standard is we need to go into Sage ERP onlineservices.com. I'll get signed in here. And we'll just have a look at the users. So we have some users here. Now, these are all people that work at Sage, so I'm not giving any external information out. But essentially, all you need to do is, if they need to have full admin access to all of the companies, then the user role will be set to Customer Operations Agent Operator. And if they just need access to the web portal, then the customer user role will be sufficient in this column here. But that's only the first step. So once you've done that, what we need to do is go back into Sage 200 Standard, which is what we're looking at now. And if we go into Settings, we go into Organizational Financial, and then into Company Details. Excuse me, sorry, I've gone in the wrong place. company management. That's what I'm looking for, man. It's not company details. Give me a second. There you go, company management. I just saw the word company. And we can see here the list of users that we have in this company and the list of companies that we have. Now we need to make sure that the users have access to the relevant companies on this screen. And then once we do that, we need to come back into user access in the same area of the program. And we have the tick box for the web user, which is against each user that we have set up. And if we look to the bottom, we can see as well how many web users that we have and how many are currently assigned. Now, I mentioned the URL for the standard version, and this is the only URL any standard user will use. It doesn't have the same requirements as professional does for your internal or your external access. You will sign in through this web portal, and you'll be asked for your Sage ID, your Sage account, formerly known as your Sage ID, which will then give you access to whatever you have set up for you for each individual user. If I just quickly drop back to standard for a second there, and we'll go back to the web forms once I remember where they are. Give me a second. There we go. There we go. And one last thing from me is I will be remiss to not remind people that we do have access to things like our roadmap and Sage City and whatnot from the home screen on the web portals as well. So if any user wants to check what's coming up next, if they need any help, if they want to ask any questions, then we'll have the links on this screen here as we do in the normal program as well. So that's it from my part, and hopefully I've warmed you up ready for Ben, like I say, the main event. And if you give me 1 second while I deal with my IT side of things, I'll try and get Ben made as the presenter. Are you ready for Ben? You ready for this, Ben?
I certainly am. Thank you very much.
Good man. I'm going to transfer it now, okay? Thanks, everybody. Have a good day and a good weekend. Cheers.
Brilliant. Okay, so I hope everybody can see a slide at this point.
Yeah, all good there, Ben.
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. Brilliant. So thanks for that, Pete. Really appreciate it. And hi, everybody. I'm Ben Smith, team leader for Dev Support, Developer Services. And basically, I'm here to cover off some of the major features being added to 200 for 2023 R2. I've only got sort of limited time to cover, and the audience here is a fairly mixed one. So I'll be covering these topics at quite a high level for this introduction. And as Michael already alluded to, we've got obviously that other lunch and learn in September, and so hopefully we'll be able to go a bit more detail for you there as well. So I suppose the big question is, when it comes to the actual new features, what are they? So starting with the Sage 200 web portal, this is a really big change in that you can now customize the existing screens in both standard for the first time and professional, and you can also use professional to create brand new screens as well. These customizations that kind of operate in the same way as the rest of the web portal and then interact with the Sage 200 API endpoints as well. Changes to the actual API itself, you can now extend existing endpoints to include new custom fields for the first time. And you can also generate API code, allowing you to create your own custom Sage 200 API endpoints for new persistent objects using customly generated ones in the Sage Object Store Builder. With that, the SDBX packager has now been improved to support web amendability, including the deployment of additional file types and the creation of web portal feature targets too. You've also got the addition of spare fields. So we've added an additional 18 spare fields across multiple tables, which are automatically accessible from the API as well. So that's primarily centered around giving additional customization options to standard. And so what is web screen amendability? It is basically to web screens what the SDK has allowed for a long time to the desktop client, allowing customization of the web portal through the addition of components such as buttons, text boxes, grids, and things like that. And you can see a couple of examples to the right of that slide there. We've got a demo button, progress bars, a grid, and also text box at the bottom. And so the hope here is that it'll allow partners and developers to create new add-ons that can be deployed for professional, and as I say, also for the first time using it with standard as well. And so how do we deploy these things? So as Pete has just so beautifully demoed, when you've got the web portal set up, there is a different area achieved. It's slightly different in standard and professional, but it's the same idea. And with professional, you can go through accounting system manager, as opposed to the example I've got there, which is in standard for organizational and financial. And so you see when we're in the web extensions screen itself, you've got a list of the various different extensions that have been added. You can also specify a priority order, which is really helpful in case there is an interaction where two different schemas might be making changes to the same thing. You can determine which one should win out in a given scenario. You can also amend the actual schemas themselves directly in this section, as well as bulk disable them, which is super helpful when you're looking to troubleshoot. So say like if you've got an issue, maybe you're thinking about calling support about it, but you're not sure if it's due to something gone wrong in like web portal, like the core customization, the core functionality of that, or whether it's due to a customization. And so the obvious thing to do at that point is to disable every extension, see do we still have the problem or not. And then if that resolves it, you know that it's something specific to a given extension, and so you can slowly turn them back on until the problem reappears, and that'll help you to identify the culprit. And one thing as well is that you can, once you've done that, it's great if you're making customizations to a single site. So it's really helpful. You come into a given site, go in here and add something within this view. But if you're working with multiple professional sites and perhaps you have the same kind of extension or add-on that you wish to deploy across multiple, you can package these schema files up and add them to an SDBX package as well. So that is another option that you can use. So looking at how the actual schema files themselves work, customization is primarily performed through these schemas, which are primarily written in, well, they are entirely written in JSON. And they contain different sections that define different things. So first off, you've got the version, which basically that section allows the developer to specify the version of web amendability that they're using. So currently we have it set at version 1, and as we improve the whole offering and add new features and functionality, that number will increment, and it will allow a developer to say, well, actually, we need these features. We're going to specify this version and move forward from there. The pages section is essentially used, as the name would suggest, to determine which pages or screens a given customization should actually be added to. You have UI extensions, and this is kind of the bread and butter where you're actually adding the components. So it's defining, what am I adding? Is it a text box? Is it a grid, a pod, whatever that might be, and specifying key properties about it. And we have actually got, along with this, which I'll briefly show you in a little bit, a sort of a schema reference for all of these components, where you have a great long list of the various components you can interact with, and it gives you examples on how to use them, various properties and best practices and things like that as well. We have actions, which is similar to a function or a method call for the developers in the audience. It is basically using a reusable piece of code that can be called to make something happen. So in the case of this, for example, like enable or disable a field. We have the validation section, which allows us to control the values that are actually input into something, into a component, and make sure that they are, say, the correct type or length, for example, and we can throw up errors of warnings if they don't validate successfully. And last on this list, we've got the events section. So this is basically like one key example you can see on the right on the slide is that the onload event, and that is basically something that we can hook into when that event takes place to specify that something must happen. And that could be a specified change that you explicitly write to say, when this event happens, do X. So again, in that example, you know, it's we're saying, when the page loads, we want to add my text box, and that's defined at that point. Or another thing that you could do is the actions we were talking about earlier. You can say, oh well, I want to call a specific action when an event occurs as well. So it gives a bit, greater functionality from that perspective too. And so yeah, as I mentioned already, this is the first time in its history that we're going to be offering some kind of customization to standard. So the introduction of what we originally termed the light amendability model, which will help make standard a much more compelling solution, I think, in the wider base, especially from developers. And in standard, you link various components, as I say, to existing fields, or you can use the spare fields that are on the database tables, which allows you to then customize the data that's being shown or added back to the database as well. In Professional, you can do all of that same functionality. But as I said earlier, you've also got the choice to deploy those schema files inside your SDBX packages as add-ons. But you can also do that alongside other customizations. So that might be existing table extensions, or you could even use full fat JavaScript to design more complex functions that you can call that you might not maybe able to be achieved with the schema, or it might make more sense to do it actually in JavaScript. And that would include even the use of third-party or other JavaScript libraries just to extend that functionality. So it really does open up an option to a lot of cool things. And working with the schemas, though, going back to that, I mean, it's done in a kind of like a low-code data-driven approach, which means you don't really need a significant amount of development experience to actually implement changes. But at the same time, you can go to a really sophisticated level with enough to, you can kind of cater for the vast majority of use cases. So it is really still very powerful. And on the right of that slide, you can see it's kind of a practical example that we put together based on early proof of concept, where it was the customization capabilities we used really for a specific use case where a business had stated to us that within their stock item data, they wanted their part numbers formatted in a particular way. So that was 3 separate sections, where the first 2 would be preset and the third would be selected from a grid. And you can see there at the top how we've got a child dialog, this cool dialog that's popped, and we're basically presetting the part numbers formatted into those 3 sections. So it's just a little example, but it's a really good use of this as well. Okay, so I'm now just going to show you the updated version of the Sage 200 API and new web amendability documentation as well on the developer portal. So this is the first time that Sage 200 has made an appearance on the developer portal. And what we're doing is we've essentially split the site into two halves, if you like. One that covers off the Sage 200 API, giving you access to various different guides, getting started. And one thing that those of you who've been using this for a while might have noticed is that at the moment things are a little fragmented. We've had guides in the knowledge base, some stuff in the desktop help, various different things that if you don't know, it was really hard to kind of get a full view of everything. And so the idea here is that everything relating to the API we've pulled together into one place, and updated the documentation for things like the API reference. So we're now rendering this out in a different way, in a more user-friendly format. So you can see there, we've got a list of some of the endpoints here, such as the sales invoices. And if you wanted to make a post request, you've got the details, full example of how you would do that, the body of the request. Yeah, so that's really, really good. And then on the web amendability side, we've got a detailed guide on how to get started and make the customization I'm going to briefly demo actually in a moment, along with the component library that I was talking about. And so if we just pop to this real quick, you can see, as I said, you've got the list of all the various different components that we have down the side. So say like a button, an example of what that looks like. And this is just a brief example in the schema file itself of saying, here's the UI extension. This is the actual button that we're setting up. We're calling it a button. We're giving it a margin, and we're saying what's going to happen when we click it. We're also defining the page that should be applied to, and we're also saying that when that page loads, actually set where that component's supposed to sit. So it gives you a very quick, at a glance, oh, if I want to work with it. We've also got some do's and don'ts, some recommendations, and then various properties that you can set in relation to that component, and that changes depending on what you're looking at there as well. Alongside that, we've got various guides, you can see there, such as the ability to create various screens going through the detail of what you need to do. So there's a lot of really good and interesting stuff on there. So I'm looking forward to that being made public and available, and that will be in time for the release of standard on the 14th of August as well. So if we go now into the web portal, just refresh that and make sure we're still in it. Brilliant. A couple of things I want to call out is if, say, we wanted to add a new text box to the supplier screen, and we want to add it so that, or you make amendments to a supplier, you should have the ability to not only see, but also update that field as well. So if we come to, say, the new supplier screen, you can see we've got a code, name, short name, various things in the top pod here. Maybe we want to add a nickname or something just underneath this short name field. Something that we note is that all the fields when this page loads are currently accessible, as you'd expect in a new form, because you should just be able to write into them. But if we go to the amend supplier screen, you'll note that everything except the code is grayed out at this point, because again, you haven't made a selection, so it wouldn't be showing anything. So they're just two things I'd like you to try and remember there as well. So if we come into the settings, organizational, financial, and look at the web extensions, got all sorts in here, and here's the supplier nickname that I've made earlier. Currently, you can see that it's not enabled. So if we click amend to go into here, this is a more in-depth look at the actual the web extension screen when you go into the editor. So we do have a code editor that you can see here that does do it does do a little bit of validation, and it will tell you if the JSON itself isn't formatted correctly and things like that. But specific to this example, you can see we've got version of 1. We've got the pages set, so we want to add this to both the new supplier and amend supplier screens. And then the UI extension itself is, we're going to give it an ID of nickname, and we're going to create a text box and give it an ID of spare text 1. Now that ID is linked to the field in that we're going to make the call to the API through. Say, okay, on a supplier object, supplier record, there's a spare text 1 field, and that's what we're going to use to create this text box. Giving it the nickname the label of nickname, and note that when we first create it, it's disabled. We're setting disable to true, and that's basically because if the way around I've done it is that if you were to go to the amend screen, we, like every other various field on there, we want them to be disabled until someone's made a selection, and that's just shorthand this one here for margin top, just to get that spacing correct as well. So I've also created an action, and that is, I've named it enable field, and essentially all that's going to do is when that's called, it will switch that text box from disabled to enabled. So we're saying disabled false. I've set a little bit of validation on it. So I said I want to throw an error on spare text 1, which should always be a string of characters. And I've said that there's a constraint and that the maximum value allowed in that field is 10. So we can test that out and make sure that that works as well. And then further down, this is the really important section, is the events. So when do we want things to take place? So first of all, we've set on load. So when either of those pages load, we want to add the nickname. But what we're doing is we're saying the UI extension is the component we want to add, but the component ID is the one we want to link it to. So when you're placing it in a given area, what you're doing is saying, well, I want it to sit underneath this one. So I'm going to find that first component and pop it at the bottom, which is what the panel property there specifies. And then further down within the events section, we've also said that when we load the new supplier screen, we want to call an action of enable field. And that's because if you remember, when we go to that new supplier area, all of the fields are enabled correctly as they should be. So we want to mirror that behavior of the default components as well. And then the last section here, we've got for the amend supplier one, this one's a little bit more complicated. What we're saying is there's an event of on state change. So when we look at a given field or a component, we're looking, like watching to see if that changes, then do something, essentially. So in the case of this, we're setting a watch target on the name of the supplier, and we're saying that on change, if it is not equal, so if the name is not equal to blank, so if it changes to something, then call the action enable field and switch it on. And so that means that with the amend, the page loads, everything is disabled. We make a selection from the code option, everything populates, so we know that a new supply has been selected, and we want to then switch on that amend field, switch on the nickname field within the amend screen itself. And if not, it just stays disabled. So if it remains blank, basically. So that's essentially all that we needed to specify. It's not overly complex. There's quite a bit, quite a few different sections to go through, but I hope that's clear. What we'll do is we'll set it to enable. We'll click save there. And then first of all, let's go back to the new supplier screen. And when we do that, you can see here is our lovely nickname field, and that is, open and active, and we can type in it. Now, if I said, actually, I'll do it in the amend one first. If we go back to amend, and it does detect whether or not the form has been made dirty, you've made some changes, and it offers to save that if it detects that as well, which is great. But again, here you can see that the nickname field itself is grayed out. So let's see what happens if we choose a supplier. The rest of the fields all activate, as does the nickname. So that's fantastic. And say if we wanted just to test that validation out, we say this is too long, because I'm pretty sure that's a little too long, and we click off, you can see straight away that validation, that error has fired and prevents us from actually specifying that, and you've got that added down the bottom here as well. And if we click save, it won't accept it. So that's great. So that all works as intended. Yeah, brilliant. So I hope that does make some sense. And what we'll do, we'll just quickly switch back to my slides. Great. So a further aspect of this release for developers is to finally be able to create their own custom API fields and endpoints. So this might be through extending an existing table, or to add new fields, or brand new tables with your own properties. And that's available for developer program members who are using the SDK tools in Sage 200 Professional. And it's achieved through the use of the Object Store Builder, which now has options to generate the API code required, along with various business objects, tables, and so on. So you can see that highlighted in the screenshot. Got this, it's just a tick box, and then that will essentially take care of the rest. It's really, really efficient to do. A few things that we need to call out, a few limitations. So the first being that you can't actually amend the operations of an existing endpoint. So if at the moment we only specify that there's a get available, you can't add, put, post, etc. And that's for a good reason. That in the back end, there's changes that we would need to make first to enable that and make sure that that's working correctly. Not to say that we won't for any of these changes. If you have a business case for it and you come through to us, and say, look, I could really do with this showing, or something that changed, I'd love to hear from you, because the more feedback we get around this, the more improvements we can make, and we can schedule in that work to do that as well. The second thing being that you can't expose a Sage field in the API where Sage haven't yet made them available. So say on an existing endpoint, there's a given field that you'd love to be able to interact with. Again, there'll be a good reason that it's not. Chances are it's because it's linked to the UI or something in the desktop application, and we would need that request from you to say, okay, we can unpick that and make sure everything's, that the business object itself holds the logic and can work with that as well. And the third thing is that you can't actually expose a Sage object to the API that hasn't yet been exposed, one of ours. Again, be a similar reason, such as fixed assets, that kind of thing. But brand new objects and brand new fields, they're all fine. Spare text fields have all been made available as well, as I say, but they will automatically be open to the API by default as well. So they've been added, and from this version, you now have an extended number of those to work with. Yeah, so really it shows that we have a great set of customization options altogether in Sage 200. Well, just this last one here to summarize. So for me, it's really the capabilities that we're offering. They fall into three main areas. You've got the ability to grow the external ecosystem around Sage 200 through the consumption of the API. You've got the customization brought to standard for the first time in the form of amendability of the web portal. And you have that full customization of Professional and the SDK with the amendability model, and also the option to package and work directly with JavaScript for add-ons deployed via SDBX packages. And I'm just thinking, I've got time to whiz through these. I'll go quite quickly, but just got a few examples of some of these, other demo customizations. And what you can see here is within the new sales order screen, we've added 2 custom fields, and we've used the spare fields in standard to achieve this. So that's basically added a contract number into an existing pod at the top that you can see, and between 2 fields. So it just shows you don't just always have to tag these things on the end. Before, when we specified the UI extension, we could say we want it to sit underneath a given component, as opposed to just always added to the end. And similarly, you can see at the bottom there, we have a grid and a column's been added third from the end. So again, not just tacked on the end. We have the option to change that. All of this is key to make it, well, when we were working on it, I should say, one thing we really wanted to make sure is that everything was responsive, and you can interact with this, and all of the new components that you add behave in exactly the same way as the existing ones. So you can see there where we've reduced down the size of the screen, the various text fields sits just like its parent within that pod, and you've got the grid drops down below, so that all works lovely. A further example here is inserting of a custom pod where you've got that quality assurance section with the various different text fields, and that can be inserted in the middle of an area. Again, it's not something that just had to be tacked onto the end. And it just shows that you can also, this one, when you press a specific section or an add button, it pops a child dialog, and you can add to those as well without issue. That's not a problem too. And then this third example is really quite a good one to demonstrate the power of this, especially if you use everything that we're offering. One example being that Sage 50 currently has an option for communications in a customer record that Sage 200 actually doesn't offer currently. And what we wanted to do is put together an example here that really demonstrates the power of this, because you can add to the web portal to a new customer or amend customer screen. We've added new custom tables in the back end, a communications tab with a grid down below that you can see a list of all the various communications and the option to add them. So when we click the add entry button, you can see you get a new communication screen. Everything there has been defined new that you can add relating to the communication, all persists back to the database and can be viewed at any time. So it's a really, really powerful feature that you could add. You could put that together, ship that, package it up. Brilliant. I'm sure people would get a lot of value from it as well. And then almost done, just the extension of spare fields section. So we were obviously talking about that, and just a little bit more information. So spare text has been increased from 3 to 10, as has spare number. And we've added some more dates to spare dates, so from 3 to 5, and also the spare bit increased from 3 to 5. And so it takes us basically now from 12 spare fields up to 30 that are accessible in the various different areas, as we say, sales, purchase, nominal, and so on as well. And then the last thing I just wanted to cover off is resources and support. So as I've shown you, we've got a whole new website with everything in developer.sage.com going through with various different guides. The storybook, which is essentially that component schema that I showed you, which defines the JSON schema for the various different components. Worked examples, so we're going to produce various different things, not necessarily everything at launch, but it's going to be something that we're iterating on constantly with feedback to produce new documentation to help. And also one thing I haven't shown because it's not live yet is on the developer community. So we do have currently a developer community forum, which is separate to Sage City, that is specifically tailored towards devs and asking questions relating to this sort of thing. At the moment, Sage 200 is not present, but will be in time for standards release. And that will have a general section, one for the API and also for amendability questions. And also members of the UK developer program will, as normal, receive SDK documentation, which covers off in-depth guides on doing the API code generation, extending tables, extending endpoints, that kind of thing, as well as some more worked examples there too. And obviously you've got direct access to my team of developer services to request support via email there as well. So that's pretty much everything I've got to cover today, and I hope you've all learned a few things about the amendability model for Sage 200 and the web portal, and hope to share more with you in September once everything's been released. So thanks very much for listening, and back to you, Michael.
Brilliant, Ben. Yeah, thanks very much. So we do have a question in the chat from Sarah Bell, so I'll give it to you, Ben, if that's all right. So Sarah's asked, will there be any training courses for developers on how to use this customization? Or you mentioned the resources, but will there be any courses done? Maybe one for you as well, Pete?
So I'm happy to say that, yeah, there will be, absolutely. There's been an awful lot of work gone into producing the website, the documentation, everything we've produced so far. It's likely going to be between, I hope, release and towards the back end of the year. But yes, there will be training courses. I also plan to produce various different videos for the developer YouTube channel as well to put some more things out there as well. So there's various options.
Excellent, brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for that one. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to pop in the chat? We can give you a couple more minutes if you want to go ahead and pop something in there. Sarah's just saying thanks. Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. And if anyone does have any further questions, we can obviously you can drop them to myself or Ben or Pete. So I think you've got the Centre for Excellence mailbox as well for us. So feel free to drop us one as well. What's with the shirt? Good one, Steve. Just, you know, it's been very wet and windy up in the northeast, as you know yourself, Steve. So just thought we'll try and summon some good weather, but it doesn't seem to have happened. It's probably had the adverse effect, and yeah, no, there's nothing more to it than that, really. Appreciate the comments. Not sent as red at all.
It's
Well,
not
if
the
no
new
one else,
brand. We haven't changed the brand or anything again.
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe start a boy band. But yeah, if anyone's got any other questions, obviously feel free to drop us an email. I say who are you, like it's Steve, yeah. Other than that, guys, hope you have a great weekend. Thanks again to Ben for taking part and taking out the time out of his busy schedule, because he's a really busy man. So really appreciate that, Ben. And thanks again for you all attending. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good one, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye bye.